March 8, 1954. 2:17 a.m. Vincent "Vinny" Knuckles Marcello knelt on the concrete floor of an abandoned meatpacking warehouse in the Bronx, his Armani suit soaked through with sweat despite the freezing temperature, hands zip-tied behind his back, watching his wife, his mother, his 2 sons, and his 15-year-old daughter sitting in chairs arranged in a perfect semicircle around him. Not one of them had a scratch. Not one rope binding them. But the terror in their eyes was absolute. Because standing in the shadows, barely visible in the dim light filtering through the broken windows, was Bumpy Johnson. And Vinny knew, with the certainty of a man staring at his own tombstone, that the next words out of his mouth would determine whether his entire bloodline saw sunrise. Everyone expected Bumpy to kill them all. What Vinny didn't know was that 24 hours earlier, he'd signed his own surrender. To understand what happened in that warehouse, you need to understand what Harlem meant in 1954, and what Mamie Johnson meant to Bumpy. The neighborhood was a powder keg. Italian families pushing north from Little Italy, Irish crews holding on to the last scraps of their territory, and Bumpy Johnson sitting at the center like a spider in a web he'd spent 2 decades spinning. But Mamie wasn't part of the game. She was an educated woman, a Philadelphia native who'd fallen in love with a gangster and decided that love was worth the risk. She taught elementary school kids during the day, played piano at their brownstone at night, and carried Bumpy's first child, a daughter they'd already named Helen, after Mamie's mother, in her 7th month. Bumpy had a code that everyone who knew him understood: family was sacred. Business was business. You never, ever crossed that line. Bumpy Johnson wasn't just another Harlem boss. He was a chess player who'd learned the game in Alcatraz, sitting across from the smartest criminals America had ever produced. Studying strategy like monks studied scripture. While other gangsters bought flashy cars and diamond rings, Bumpy bought books. Philosophy. Military history. Sun Tzu. He'd walk down 125th Street in a tailored suit and a fedora, and people didn't move out of fear. They moved out of respect. Because Bumpy had never killed a man who didn't deserve it, never taken from the community he protected, never forgot where he came from. He'd survived Dutch Schultz, Lucky Luciano, and a decade in the most brutal prison in America. And he'd come out smarter, colder, more patient. The kind of man who understood that the most dangerous move was the one your enemy never saw coming. Vincent Marcello had a different philosophy. Power through intimidation. Territory through violence. He ran a crew of 15 soldiers out of Arthur Avenue in the Bronx, handling loan sharking, protection rackets, and heroin distribution for the Genovese family. Vinny had climbed the ranks by being the guy who did the things other men wouldn't do. The enforcer who broke kneecaps with a baseball bat. The collector who threw fathers off rooftops while their kids watched. He was vicious, efficient, and hungry. And he looked at Harlem like it was a gold mine with an expiration date. 3 weeks before that night in the warehouse, Vinny sat in the back room of Mazzola's bakery with his underboss, a scarred pit bull of a man named Tony Brass. "Bumpy thinks he's untouchable," Vinny said, cutting into a cannoli with surgical precision. "Thinks because he's got the neighborhood, because he's got connections, we can't move on him. But every man's got a weak spot." Tony leaned back, cracking his knuckles. "What are you thinking, boss?" Vinny smiled. The smile of a man who'd discovered a secret. His wife. She's pregnant. Walks to school every morning at 7:30. No bodyguards. No backup. Just her and that baby. Tony's face went pale. "Vinny, you touch a pregnant woman, the whole city will know that Bumpy Johnson couldn't protect his own family." Vinny interrupted, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than shouting. "You want Harlem? You don't take it by fighting Bumpy head-on. You take it by making him look weak. By showing that all his power doesn't mean a damn thing when it comes to the people he loves. We send a message. He backs off, or next time, it's not just a message." The plan was simple. Brutal. And absolutely guaranteed to start a war. Which was exactly what Vinny wanted. Because in war, territories shifted. Power changed hands. and Vinnie Marcello planned to be standing on top when the smoke cleared. What Vinnie didn't know was that Bumpy Johnson had been watching him for 6 months. Had placed 3 of his own people inside Vinnie's crew, a runner named Marcus who fed Bumpy every conversation, a numbers collector named Sweet Jimmy who mapped every one of Vinnie's properties, and a cleaner named Ophelia who worked in Vinnie's own house and knew the schedules, the routines, the vulnerabilities of every single Marcello family member. Bumpy had learned a long time ago that the best intelligence didn't come from wiretaps or bribes. It came from people nobody noticed. The help. The drivers. The ones treated like furniture. And Ophelia had been sending Bumpy detailed reports for half a year. So when Marcus called Bumpy at 11:42 p.m. on March 7th and said, "Boss, you need to hear this," and played a recording of Vinnie's plan to hurt Mamie, Bumpy didn't explode. He didn't rage. He hung up the phone, walked to his study, poured 2 fingers of bourbon, and spent exactly 90 minutes planning Vincent Marcello's complete destruction. March 7th, 7:31 a.m. Mamie Johnson walked down the front steps of their brownstone on 127th Street, her hand resting on her swollen belly, humming a Billie Holiday tune, heading toward PS 113 where she taught 2nd grade. She made it exactly 14 steps before 2 men stepped out of a black Buick. She recognized the intention before she saw their faces. Started to turn. Too late. The first man grabbed her arm. She screamed. Fought. The second man shoved her. Hard. She fell backward down the concrete steps, her body twisting, trying to protect the baby, and the sound of her head hitting the sidewalk cracked through the morning air like a gunshot. The men were back in the Buick and gone in under 15 seconds. Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor, found Mamie 30 seconds later, unconscious, blood pooling beneath her head, her breath shallow. The ambulance arrived in 4 minutes. Harlem Hospital's emergency room in 8. And Bumpy Johnson got the call at 7:47 a.m. The nurse who delivered the news said later that she'd never seen a man go so still. Like every molecule in his body had frozen. Bumpy listened to the words. Critical condition, possible skull fracture. The baby, and when she finished, he said, "Thank you," hung up, and walked out of his office. His lieutenant, a man named Junie Bird who'd known Bumpy for 20 years, took one look at his boss's face and felt ice slide down his spine. "Bumpy?" Bumpy's voice came out flat. "Dead. Call everyone. The whole network. I need locations, schedules, and vulnerabilities for Vincent Marcello's entire family. Mother, wife, children, cousins. Everyone. I need it in 6 hours." Junie started to ask why, then thought better of it. "You got it, boss." Bumpy headed for the door, then stopped. Turned back. "And Junie? Nobody touches them. Not a hair. Not a bruise. Not even a hard word. This isn't about violence. This is about education." Harlem Hospital, 9:15 a.m. Bumpy sat beside Mamie's bed, her hand in his, listening to machines beep and hiss, watching the bandages wrapped around her head, the bruises already blooming purple across her face. The doctor had been cautiously optimistic. Skull fracture, but not catastrophic. The baby's heartbeat was strong. But Mamie hadn't woken up yet. And every minute she lay there unconscious, Bumpy felt something inside him calcifying into a purpose so absolute it bordered on religious. A nurse came in to check vitals, saw the look on his face, and left without saying a word. At 11:30 a.m., Bumpy kissed Mamie's forehead, whispered something nobody else heard, and walked out. By noon, he'd made 7 phone calls. By 2 p.m., the most sophisticated kidnapping operation in New York criminal history was in motion. Vincent Marcello's mother, Rosa, age 73, lived in a walk-up apartment in Belmont. She went to morning mass every single day at Our Lady of Mount Carmel. At 6:45 a.m. on March 8th, she walked out of the church into the arms of 2 women who helped her into a car with such gentleness she thought they were her son's friends. By the time she realized they weren't, she was in a comfortable bedroom in a brownstone she didn't recognize, with a pot of fresh espresso and a plate of sfogliatelle on the nightstand. Vinnie's wife, Angela, picked up their daughter Sophia from private school at 3 p.m. Except the woman who picked her up wasn't Angela. It was a teacher from another class Angela had met once at a school event. A teacher who explained, very calmly, that Sophia needed to come with her for a family emergency. Sophia, 15 and terrified, got in the car. Found her mother already there. Either of them harmed. Just scared. Vinny's two sons, Michael and Frankie, ages 19 and 22, were taken from a pool hall on 187th Street at 8:30 p.m. 6 men surrounded them, guns hidden but implied, and walked them to 2 separate cars. Not a punch thrown. Not a shot fired. Just disappeared. By midnight, Vincent Marcello's entire family, 5 people, were sitting in separate rooms of a warehouse Bumpy owned in Hunts Point. Ophelia, Vinny's cleaner, had made sure they were comfortable. Chairs, blankets, food, water. Bathrooms. She'd even brought Rose's heart medication and Sophia's inhaler. Because Bumpy's instructions had been crystal clear. Treat them like guests. Scared guests, but guests. No violence. No threats. Just silence. Let them sit with their fear and imagine what could happen. At 1:47 a.m., Bumpy's crew picked up Vincent Marcello himself. Grabbed him outside his mistress's apartment in Riverdale, where Ophelia had told them he spent every Thursday night. Vinny fought. Got pistol-whipped once for his trouble. And woke up in that warehouse, zip-tied, on his knees, staring at his entire family arranged in front of him like a jury. Bumpy stepped out of the shadows. Didn't say a word for 30 seconds. Just let Vinny look at his family, see they were unharmed, and start understanding the magnitude of what had just happened. Finally, Bumpy spoke, his voice quiet, conversational, like they were discussing the weather. Your mother's blood pressure medication is on the table next to her. Your daughter's inhaler is in her purse. Your wife's anxiety prescription is in the bathroom. I made sure Ophelia brought everything they need to be comfortable. Vinny's eyes went wide. Ophelia. Your cleaner. She's been working for me since last September. Bumpy pulled up a chair, sat down, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. Here's what's going to happen, Vincent. You're going to listen. Your family's going to listen. And then you're going to make a choice. This morning, 2 of your men pushed my pregnant wife down a flight of stairs. She's in Harlem Hospital right now with a skull fracture. My daughter, who hasn't even been born yet, almost died. Your plan was to send me a message. To show me I couldn't protect my family. To make me look weak so you could take Harlem. Bumpy's voice never rose above that same quiet tone, but every word landed like a hammer. So I brought your family here to teach you something. I could kill them. Every single one. Your mother. Your wife. Your daughter. Your sons. I could make you watch and then kill you last. That's what you expected, isn't it? That's what a man like you would do. Vinny was shaking now, tears running down his face, trying to speak through a mouth that wouldn't form words. Bumpy held up one hand. But I'm not you. I don't hurt innocent people to prove a point. That's the difference between us, Vincent. That's why Harlem is mine and always will be. Your family is going home tonight. Unharmed. Not a bruise. Not a scratch. But you're going to do 3 things. First, you're going to personally deliver $50,000 to Harlem Hospital for Mamie Johnson's medical care. You're going to hand it to the head administrator and tell them exactly why you're giving it. Second, you're going to find the 2 men who touched my wife and deliver them to me. I don't care how you do it. I don't care what you tell them. But they're going to answer for what they did. And third, you're going to call a meeting with your boss, Paul Genovese, and you're going to explain to him that Harlem is permanently off limits. Not because I threatened war. Because you learned that some territories aren't worth the cost. Bumpy stood, looked down at Vinny with something close to pity. Or you can refuse. And your family disappears. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. But one day, one of them won't come home. And you'll spend the rest of your life wondering when I'm coming for the next one. Vincent Marcello broke. Completely. sobbed like a child and nodded and swore on his mother's life that he'd do everything Bumpy demanded. Bumpy gestured to his men. The zip ties came off. Vinny's family was helped to their feet, led to cars, driven home. Every single one of them whole. Safe. Traumatized but untouched. At 4:15 a.m., Vinny Marcello sat in his own living room, surrounded by his family, understanding with perfect clarity that Bumpy Johnson had just given him a gift more valuable than his life. The gift of mercy. And the lesson that mercy, when given by a man powerful enough to destroy you, is the most terrifying thing in the world. 48 hours later, Vinny Marcello walked into Harlem Hospital with a briefcase containing $50,000 in cash. Handed it to the administrator. Said word for word, "This is for Mamie Johnson's care. From the man who hurt her." The story spread through New York's underworld like a virus. Bumpy Johnson had kidnapped an entire mob family and sent them home without a scratch. Had forced a Genovese enforcer to personally fund his victims' recovery. Had turned a declaration of war into a masterclass in psychological warfare. The two men who'd pushed Mamie disappeared 3 days after that. Their bodies were never found. But the message was clear. Cross Bumpy's family, and mercy had limits. Paul Genovese called a meeting with Bumpy 1 week later. Sat across from him in a restaurant in Little Italy, two of the most powerful men in New York, and said something nobody thought they'd ever hear. "Harlem is yours. Permanently. No incursions. No takeovers. No territory disputes. You've earned it." Bumpy sipped his coffee, didn't smile, just nodded once. Because he'd proven something more important than dominance. He'd proven that intelligence and restraint were deadlier than violence. That the man who could destroy his enemies but chose not to was the most dangerous man in the room. That power wasn't measured by body count. It was measured by how many people knew you could kill them and chose to let them live. Mamie Johnson woke up 5 days after the attack. The baby was fine. Helen Johnson was born healthy 3 months later, in June of 1954, and grew up knowing that her father had moved heaven and earth to keep her safe before she'd even taken her first breath. Vincent Marcello lived another 20 years, rose to become a capo in the Genovese family, and never, not once, made a move on Harlem again. Because he'd learned something in that warehouse that he never forgot. The most dangerous man in the world isn't the one who'll kill you. It's the one who'll let you live and make sure you spend every day after that knowing he could have made a different choice. The streets still tell the story. The night Bumpy Johnson kidnapped a mobster's entire family and sent them home without a scratch. The 24 hours that changed the power structure of New York forever. It established a principle that would echo through organized crime for generations. You can take territory through violence. You can hold power through fear. But you can't build a legacy unless people respect the line you won't cross even when you're powerful enough to cross it. Bumpy Johnson drew that line around family. Around innocence. Around the idea that some things are sacred even in a world where nothing else is. If this story made you reconsider what real power looks like, hit that like button. If you're not subscribed, what are you waiting for? Drop a comment and let me know. If you were Vincent Marcello that night, would you have kept your word, or would you have spent the rest of your life planning revenge? Turn those notifications on, because next week, I'm bringing you the story of how Bumpy Johnson walked into a police precinct unarmed, surrounded by cops who wanted him dead, and walked out 3 hours later with the chief of police owing him a favor. The most powerful weapon in the world isn't a gun. It's information. And knowing exactly when to use it. Remember, the strongest people aren't the ones who destroy their enemies. They're the ones who show their enemies mercy and make sure everyone knows they chose to.